meeting for February of the Inlet and Beach Protection Board to order. Wanda will be absent. She had a conflict today. Agenda approval? Is there a motion to...
I give the motion for approval. Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The agenda is approved. Approval of minutes from the January 24th meeting. Are there any changes or corrections?
Member Thomas was pretty confused along the way, but I can make a motion for approval.
I know, and Chair Myers sure did talk a lot. I had, I think, a correction on page 2. I said it's about 2/3 of the way down regarding Chair Myers said she talked to building inspector Evans, and he thinks they did a good job this time in figuring out the language. This is in reference to the inlet hazard area. It was maps. He thinks that they did a good job with the maps, not the language, because
Okay.
that's not out yet. That's all I have. Anybody else have anything else? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I approve. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that carries unanimously. Our minutes are approved. Status of the beach and inlets. Christy and David.
I had Dean and Richard for the motion there. Is that correct? Dean was the motion maker and Richard was the second. Mike. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. For the status of the beach and inlets, there has been a federal declaration for Michael in North Carolina that was done on January 31st, 2019. The kickoff meeting was held this past Monday morning at the county at their EOC building with the staff attending. The Board of Commissioners will have an update before then regarding discussions with the county and the Deeper Wider project in the agenda packet. And that will also include some of the response to the questions the town had that went back to them in our letter. The county is currently working to draft an interlocal agreement for review by the town regarding that project. There is also information that's going to be in that memo to the Board of Commissioners regarding an update on possible piggybacking on the AIWW crossing project and contracting independently for the bin widener, but staff views us being able to accomplish that project in the time frame that's being offered as not looking very promising. And the Merit is here performing work until February 25th as their test that it was going to happen after it got out of repair.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? What you wanted to ask?
No, I'm good.
I wanted to follow up. Maybe this is for later, but I wanted to follow up on the status of the modeling project.
Yep, we're working on it here. I think it's complex, and the model runs take a while. We're still a couple weeks away from finishing it. We're trying to work the different nourishment projects, the East End one versus the Oak Island one, and trying to come up with the best way to present the towns, the most meaningful way to do it.
Okay.
Concise, but yep, it's coming along.
Okay. Next month.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes. It's coming along. And then we're continuing to work with David and Christy on the FEMA. It keeps requesting additional information for the mitigation and background erosion rates and that sort of thing, and we're trying to turn that around as quickly as possible. So.
ATM's been hit with a lot of requests to help us with the FEMA process.
It's a busy time for the town.
I agree.
It seems like a lot of projects, even for the off season especially. So.
Right. I just didn't want it to fall off the table.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not.
I keep it on my agenda.
So okay.
Okay, that's all I had. Unless you guys have any more questions?
Nothing here.
You good?
Good.
Okay. Let's move on to number 5. Presentation, discussion, and possible action with Dr. Joni Askew-Backstrom and Dr. Sherry Shiflett, UNCW.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you. Thanks for inviting us, especially Dean and Peter. It's been a great opportunity. Just backtrack how we met. It was at the North Carolina Barrier Islands and Waterways Association. I gave a small presentation on kind of long-term or the impacts from Hurricane Matthew up and down along the coast from about North Whitesville Beach all the way to Sunset Beach. We did about 18 before and after high-resolution profiles, collected samples and hundreds of photographs. We did an assessment of the impacts of Matthew. So I did a small presentation. Peter and Dean kindly came to my table. We discussed some ideas, and I followed up with it. And I thought, it'd be interesting if we could somehow collaborate. So that's where this all really stems from. So again, thank you for making the time and having us here. Just briefly, myself, I'm from Finland originally. I'm a geologist, coastal geologist. I've got my master's at UNC Wilmington, working with Dr. Bill Cleary. I don't know if you've heard of him. Probably the very famous, one of the greatest coastal scientists you can probably find, at least in North Carolina. So a real mentor, real inspiration. Learned a lot from him, and everything from underwater diving to taking single-seater airplanes and flying the coast after Hurricane Floyd. That was quite scary, actually. That was quite scarier than the diving. I got my master's here, undergraduate in geology, marine geology, master's here. I did my military in Finland, the Finnish Navy. And then I spent 2 years in Florida working with coastal planning and engineering. I'm sure Fran's heard of them. They're probably something else now. Aptem, I think they are. Sure everyone keeps getting bought out and moving on. Same people are there. Ken Wilson, we worked together there. Again, I was a geologist, coastal scientist, hydrographic surveyor, and we mostly look for sand for beach nourishment for coastal communities facing erosion issues. Everywhere from the shipping channel in Texas, diving down there, that was not nice, all the way to running surveys up in Topsail Inlet and running hydrographic surveys. Following from that, I did my PhD in Ireland, looking at the impact of storms on beaches in kind of that offshore region, running some numerical models, and trying to understand how beaches and waves really impact the coast over kind of long-term erosion rates and recoveries. After that, I completed my PhD in 3 years. Woo! And then I spent 6 years in England as a marine consultant, principal geologist and marine environmental consultant, working with marine sand and gravel, looking for sand resources, using geophysical equipment, diving, running surveys, using things like GIS. And we also worked closely with offshore wind farms, looking at site selection for wind farms, cable routes, and looking at the impact studies. So we work with biologists and oceanographers and consultants and regulators and towns and everything else. And then the last year we got laid off, as happens in industry. We got bought out, laid off. Came back to the States, and I've been with UNC Wilmington now for about 3 years. This is my 4th year, and I just got my assistant professor position in August. My interest is mostly in coastal studies, the health of our reefs offshore, beach erosion storms, surveys, and working with vessels, and so on and so forth, and collaborating with kind of interdisciplinary specialists. So that's real quick my background, just to give you all a flavor of some of my experience.
Yeah, and I should bring myself in at this point, I feel like. So Oscar approached me about the Bear Island meeting that he went to, and he said, hey, I think you probably would want to be involved in this as well. My background's in Bear Island ecology and plant ecology. So I just started at UNCW as well. I'm new as of August. Prior to that, I did my master's work and PhD at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. And most of my research sites were on the Virginia Barrier Islands. I actually worked in a coastal plant ecology lab, and we were affiliated with the Virginia Coast Reserve Long-Term Ecological Research Site. So I did a lot of studies looking at dynamics of barrier islands, categorizing them with remote sensing and satellite imagery, looking at changes in upland vegetation, but really looking at this like on decadal time scale. So going back to the 1980s, 1970s, and looking at how shrub cover has changed across the island change, dynamics between grasslands and shrubs and island building and community composition. And they've been a great study site because they're undeveloped islands, so we have these natural systems to look at how they behave. And now I feel like moving to North Carolina, I can make this comparison between undeveloped islands and developed islands and bring some of those natural dynamics to understanding how do we be more resilient with human communities. So after that, I worked briefly for the Department of Environmental Quality in Virginia on Section 402 permitting, which is the NIPD's program, pollution elimination discharge. So any like wastewater treatment plants, discharges of pollutants. From there, I moved to California. I wanted to continue pursuing my academic endeavors, so I did a postdoc at the University of California, Riverside. A slightly different approach, not so much coastal there, as looking at urban systems, because my background extends more than just coastal. It's plant ecology, it's remote sensing, it's kind of incorporating all these things. So it's looking at how trees in urban environments provide benefits, ecosystem services and cooling and things like that, using on-the-ground measurements of the trees, putting temperature sensors in trees, and then also satellite imagery to corroborate that data, I guess you could say. And then from there, I worked with the Army Corps of Engineers for about 2.5 years. And I worked within their 404 program doing wetlands permitting, waters of the U.S., that type of permitting. And that's really kind of what led me to the role here as an environmental ecologist, so I could bring my background in coastal, in ecology, and also in regulatory environmental studies. So I'm really interested in coastal environments, in wetlands ecology, and in ecosystem sustainability.
So we have a geologist and a biologist.
Very
That's a long way to
Just to
say.
summarize. So again, looking for kind of those complementary strengths. We did put a few slides together. I don't know if you want us to maybe perhaps run over those.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Maybe run through this one, or
Here, this controls it, and you have to point it at that screen right there.
At that screen? Oh, okay. Do you want to?
sure. So it's just a few slides put together. After our meeting with Dean and Peter, they came up to UNC Wilmington. We just discussed some of the ideas and initiatives that maybe we could complement each other using that kind of community partnership with kind of academic institutions. And it's very well looked upon. I think it's mutually beneficial for the university. I think it's mutually beneficial for the coastal communities. We're able to assist students, graduate students with work, and I think that's really the idea behind this. It's very much encouraged by the university to develop these community partnerships. So I think it fits real nicely with the fact that we got together, so everything kind of fell nicely into place. So I just put a couple of slides together. So again, today's February 13th. Town of Holden Beach and UNC Wilmington, some coastal initiatives. I'll just go through these briefly. These are just some ideas we were considering.
Maybe you have to be closer.
Wait, and Chris, can you turn it into the slideshow format?
I can find something.
Power on.
Yeah, are you able to make them a little bit bigger?
Yeah, make it to the...
Perfect, thank you.
Great. So one of the things we did, and Frank, feel free to
Sure.
chime in anytime. Obviously, your experience is very valuable, and you know this town very well, and I've been doing lots of work here, so please feel free to contribute in any way. One of the ideas we thought about, we were looking at some of the met stations. We have offshore buoys, quite a few of them located all around the southeast coast, are run by the Coastal Ocean Research Monitoring Program. I'll talk about that briefly in a second. The idea was perhaps one way of kind of monitoring the beaches would be setting up these Argus cameras, which it's basically a coastal monitoring tool where you can kind of look at time frames and time lapses of kind of the waves and the way beaches are changing over time. So it gives you, it's almost a remote sensing tool where we don't have to be out there measuring things, but we can, over long term, we can see some of these changes. And there's some examples there from one of the cameras. There's an Argus there. And then the image in the middle shows kind of some of that time-lapse photography. So if you look at the image in the middle, it shows where those waves are breaking kind of over a longer time period. So information like that gives you a good indication where sandbars might be, how sandbars migrate over time. Perhaps there's a storm, you'd see some of those shoaling areas where kind of that wider areas, perhaps during a storm, those sandbars begin to move further offshore. That's typically what happens during storms. And then during the recovery period, those sandbars slowly start migrating back on shore, so you can in a way measure those things using some of these camera technologies, for example. Another approach probably from this camera, coming back to Sherry's expertise, is obviously we could look at changes in vegetation using this kind of camera technology. You can characterize and classify things using this. So again, it was a little bit of an idea of perhaps the town could establish something like that if you don't already have something in place. The other idea would be to set up some kind of meteorological station here, so you're measuring localized temperature, precipitation, wind patterns, wind speed, wind direction, humidity. You could have some of these met stations connected straight to your town website. People could access it directly. You can access it from your phone if you wanted to. And the idea is to have kind of that local weather knowledge rather than relying on something that might be, many miles away. Again, it's kind of ownership of your town and really understanding kind of those meteorological and oceanographic things that are taking place here. So I think that was one of those ideas. Yes?
The second picture there, how far a reach of perspective is that visual in that second picture? Like, is that picture showing me 5 miles down the beach, or is that just a couple hundred yards? It's not.
I'd say probably about a couple miles.
Okay.
I'd say that's probably looking, an analogy would be maybe being at the pier at Sunset Beach and looking down towards Bird Island.
Is that where that picture's from?
No, it's not.
Okay.
But again, it would be probably analogous to that. So I'd say a few miles. Obviously, you really want to focus on the closer stuff. You start losing resolution capabilities as you go further out. But again, you can move these cameras around. You can focus on different regions. So whatever the interest is really from the town would be more, how can this help you rather than us trying to tell you what you should be doing. It's more about you taking ownership and you showing what is it you really want to learn from some of this stuff. And again, we can help advise on that, and I'm sure.
Am I allowed to kind of jump in? So, I kind of had envisioned using them more at the inlets to watch our inlets. Again, we have this project of deepening and widening that's not been done before, and ATM is doing modeling to sketch out what we think is going to happen. But if this could be done somewhat cheaply, we put this in place. Could it reinforce the initial models, and then over time watch and see what happens, to this thing, or to the channel over the course of time?
I think it's a great idea. Again, the beauty of these things, wherever you might have something, if you have some kind of beach nourishment taking place, you can take this camera and put it over there and see how the beach nourishment is taking place, and then how the recovery, if there's a storm, the sand is lost, how it comes back. You could focus on an inlet. If there's some kind of inlet project taking place, you could take that and look at the changes and dynamics that are taking place there. I think tying it in, if there is any kind of construction activity, nourishment, storms, inlet changes, terminal groins, whatever it is, then you can really use these. It's just an additional tool to get almost daily data.
Right, we're already doing it on a regular basis. I see it more as could we enhance things,
Yeah.
and do things a little,
Yeah, because just watching the shoals kind of detach from oak and make their way over would be, pretty valuable.
It would certainly, I think it would, you mentioned putting it up on the town website, but in reality, we need the experts. We need the experts watching.
Yeah, I think
yourselves as well.
I think it would be more from the Met station would be more something to use for the town or town council or something. I think the largest would be probably something more specific. So it would be open to the world. I'm sure surfers would love it if you put that available for them to check out the surf sites. You might have an influx of surfers coming in, which is always good financially for the town. There are all sorts of possibilities, but that could be something further down. I think it'd be if you're looking really for something specific to kind of monitor on a daily basis, rather than relying on satellite imageries or drones or aerial photographs. Or I think it's just an additional tool, and you can really focus on what you like. So.
I have a question about how are they powered?
I'm sure just regular power. I haven't looked into these too much. I've worked a little bit with cams. I've worked some with weather stations. The idea is we'd look at the cost of these different systems, how much would it cost to set something like this up, and really kind of look into those in more detail. So I don't have costs at the moment,
Yeah.
or really how they function. I just know lots of presentations, lots of people use these, especially for coastal management.
So, and what kind of speeds are those rated to? I would think at hurricane speeds, recording hurricane speeds would be pretty valuable.
Mhm.
But you always read about gauges getting knocked out, that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
I think it probably depends where you put it and perhaps how you protect it. Maybe you can have some kind of a good box that kind of keeps it secure, maybe lower down, or if you have some kind of building that's protected from the wind, so I think those would be things you'd want to look at.
Yeah. So, but I was just thinking you'd have to get like a really nice one that could withstand pretty extreme winds.
I think the Argus cameras they're dedicated and created just for those purposes, for, again, kind of those coastal environments. With the Met Station, we have to look into different costs and capabilities with these.
I will tell you that I have a camera on the back of my house, pointed out at the beach that I can, live around. And it was very interesting during our storms to see, and I could see exactly what you're talking about, where the waves migrated further out and where they were hitting. And I thought it was very interesting. Both the cameras all did fine.
Mhm.
I also have a weather station too, and it's out on the dune. And it was fine too. Of course, they only work, they're internet based, so as
Yeah.
soon as I lost my internet, then, which I think was actually related to power, because I lost my modem, with the loss of power. That's kind of why I was asking. And that the weather station is solar as well, but, I didn't have any way, because it's just repeating back to my modem. So, but I did find it interesting, and from a meteorological perspective, I do think that this little arch beach right in here, in Holden Beach, the way the storms roll through, we do have a little bit different rain pattern. It's certainly different from what you guys have in Wilmington.
Yeah.
So I usually follow a couple of different weather stations, and I know my results are very drastically different than, say, even Oak Island, the airport at Oak Island, which I trust that station pretty well.
That'd be kind of the official data people would probably use for the region.
Right.
I think it is an important point. I think that's the reason behind it. It's knowledge. It's specific to Holden Beach that you can really take ownership of and really tie into whatever interests you have, whatever really is a focus area. So I think it's just an additional tool. I think they're relatively inexpensive. Depends what we consider expensive and inexpensive. But I think lots of communities are adapting them. Lots of coastal scientists are using these, and I think they do provide important information about perhaps coastal evolution. Yes?
Back to the second picture there. Is there a normal, because we're talking about a hurricane, and that's kind of a short phase event, in evaluating the migration of sandbars, low tide marks, is there a normal interval space of time that you think is sufficient in terms of a sample number of days that allows some inferences to be made? I mean, could you venture a guess? Is it a couple of weeks? Is it a month of taking that same shot over a period of time? Is that?
I think it would really depend on your climate, your oceanographic climate. Again, if you have kind of stormy weather, you'll see much more changes. If you have relatively benign summer conditions, small waves, you probably won't see much change at all. There might be small changes in kind of those sandbar patterns. You might see a little bit of accretion on the beaches. Again, I think it would be more of those high magnitude events, storms or nor'easters, or not necessarily hurricane, but those a couple of days of big stormy weather. Then those bars are going to be readjusting to those conditions. So I think, for example, I'd say from Florence, it probably took, as a surfer, you know how far out offshore you have to go to target those sandbars, because that's where the waves would be breaking. But sometimes the water would be really deep, and you have to go really far out where the waves would be breaking. Then if you have benign conditions, some small swells, slowly those things start migrating back onto shore. So again, it depends very much on kind of your meteorological climate, oceanographic conditions.
So I can add to that, when we went to the Atlantic Coastal meeting down in Charleston, there was a presentation given. It was a re-nourishment project. So they were snapping a picture every day, and then they ran this thing over the course of, months and months during the project. And oh, by the way, here comes a hurricane, and you could see how that impacted things when the hurricane came through. So it was a daily snapshot, basically, was used in that case.
And I think Vicki, I think it's also important the point you made about local precipitation. I think local rainfall patterns are very important, especially in terms of flooding, in terms of changing water characteristics, salinity, and fresh water. Probably plays a huge role in dunes and wetlands, vegetation. So I think you're just getting much better local data that I think is better than focusing on something that might be 10 miles away that might be significantly different. I think it just adds value to it. And again, it's something for you all to consider and discuss and see if you believe it it's a value. So again, it was just one of those ideas we kind of came up with. I'll let you share.
Okay. So this is what Oscar had talked to me about, is some of the dune restoration work that you've been doing. And so we were thinking, beyond just the planting themselves, but doing some more monitoring of that, right? Like a baseline of understanding how much have the dunes changed over time before restoration was even happening, and now that we're doing restoration, how is that helping to build up the dune profile? And we were thinking this would be a combination of looking at historical imagery, so just finding aerial imagery that goes back farther, some satellite imagery, especially if we can find some higher resolution imagery to help with this. Because if we get better resolution, we can start getting at the vegetation, picking out vegetation classes. I know this is kind of small. I didn't know what kind of screen we would have. But just to show you, is that pointer? No, it's not working. Point at this one. So, no, it's still getting caught up. That's okay.
I saw a red laser.
You have to come a bit lower with the pointer.
What do you mean? Yeah, but I think that even if I go into the screen, it just gets lost. Yeah. I use a green one, actually, because it shows up no matter what.
I clicked it for you.
Oh, you clicked it for me. Oh, no, go back. Sorry. Don't click forward yet.
No, that's it.
No, go back, because there's a little animation. I'll tell them when to go forward.
Okay.
Just hit, okay, thanks. So anyway, I'll just kind of point out to the image. It's the one where you see an island, and over time, the first image is from 1984, and then we're going to 2010. That's imagery that I did on Hog Island, Virginia, using satellite data. And so from that satellite data, I was able to classify like how much shrub cover there was, how much grass cover, how much sand cover. And obviously, this is a more coarse scale than just looking at a dune. But it's something we can do with the satellite imagery, is pick out certain areas, pick out what kinds of vegetation is there, and see how that's changing over time. So then, one of the things that we would like to do is figure out what are these optimal vegetation types. Should it all be American beach grass? Should there be some planting palette involved, like maybe mixing up some beach grass and some sea oats in certain densities to help build up that beach profile? So again, this is a small figure on the right. It's kind of hard to see, but it talks about climate change and impacts between climate change and humans and disruptions to natural ecosystems. But then finding ways to restore that ecosystem function and functionality is a way to build resilience within the natural community and also for the built community, for the human community, right? We have to restore some of those species, the functions that they do, to continue to maintain not only the dune ecosystem, but the island profile itself, which builds resilience of the island. So I have a second kind of understanding of this. I just want to give you like a very brief overview of some of the theory behind it. There's ideas about bistability between grassland and shrubland states, or between high dunes and low dunes. And so the idea is that when you're within a stable state, there's some resistance to turning into another state. But if a hurricane hits and you don't have a very resistant system, it's going to flatten out the dune, right? So you want to build in a lot of resistance, restore that system so that you can get to another stable state, and hopefully one that's more stable by building in more of an island profile, more vegetation. So the last thing I'll kind of say about that is I was reading some recent papers that really talk about this, that you can build in mechanisms in your island to resist overwash and to make it so that the dune is stable enough that it's going to resist that overwash during big storm events. Or on the other hand, you can have an ecosystem, I can't really use the pointer, it's the overwash reinforcing domain, meaning that it's a lower elevation, the dune's just more prone to overwash, it's not going to be as stable, it's a lower system. And so in this particular paper, they found different sites, I think from Virginia, from North Carolina, to show you what a more stable dune line looks like and a less stable one. And they're really showing that it's this combination of grasses and then building in shrubs. I think in your engineering report you mentioned that, like having some of the larger vegetation as sort of like a green wall of sorts and to resist. So adding in some of those additional elements, because the real idea here is, again, kind of hard to see, but on the top of this figure, they're showing you islands that are more resistant versus on the bottom is less resistant. And the main thing they're showing that if you can build up that profile a little bit more, you're increasing the resistance capacity, right? So having dunes that are just generally more resistant. So our idea would really be to look at what are these ideal planting palettes, planting regimes, combinations of fencing and pallets to build that dune back up and to create more stability over time.
I've got a geology question related to this. Would you venture a guess that there's a correlation, because it seems like there's three types of environments here, that there's a correlation between the three types of geology along the coast of North Carolina, with the core banks, the north coast being low and flat and long way before you get any elevation, and then the flip side, being down here. We got a 7-foot tide here.
Right.
Would you hang it out there and say that we're probably over here where you want to have the dunes high or have the capability to make them high?
I think it would probably be also an engineering question, looking at kind of long-term storm surge levels. I think that would be important to consider. Ideally, you want your dunes to be higher than kind of those storm surges that come, because then you're not going to have that overwash that we have. Masonboro Island is a great example of that. We looked at comparisons between Wetzel Beach and Masonboro Island. Obviously, Wetzel Beach is nourished. They have a healthy dune system, lots of sand in that system. What we learned from Florence and from Matthew, that the height of the dunes exceeded that storm surge level that the U.S. Geological Survey, they had sensors that they put out on the pier, so I was able to collect the data. So that perhaps the dune elevation was at, say, 10 feet, and the storm surge was only about 9 feet. We didn't see any of that overwash pattern. Instead, it would kind of cut into the dunes, and then that sand would move off into your beach area or your surf zone or something like that, and then would recover. In contrast to Masonboro Island, the elevation is only about perhaps 6 feet in many locations. We had storm surges of 6 to 8 feet, and when we went back and surveyed, there was complete overwash. The dunes had been either covered or removed. The profile had been flattened, and a lot of that sand had actually moved into the backside, which is a natural process of barrier island, the rollover process. Natural barrier islands are slowly going to be moving. Sea level rises are slowly moving landward. Because of that system, when we start modifying some of those dunes, when we start adding sand to systems, then we're stopping that overwash process, that rollover process, which we probably don't want it to occur in a developed area.
Right.
Going back to the original question, I'd say we do have different kinds of systems here. I think it looks like Sunset Beach is actually kind of a accreting beach. It seems like there's a lot of very homogeneous sand, and it seems like a very stable system. I think it might be accreting over time. It might have something to do with the hydrodynamics kind of being tucked in that corner. Might play a role. Again, modeling would show, give us a lot of these answers. But again, I think storm surge values and kind of the height of the dunes would probably be a very important thing to consider.
Well, I asked that question, but from biological standpoint, geology question.
Okay.
Biological, because of our vegetation program has primarily been oriented toward grasses. The trifecta of normal beach grasses.
Right.
And we've had discussions on what's the proper mix, and should it evolve to something, more shrub, more trees. And it would seem to me that at some point in time you would want to try to maritime forest it.
Right.
But I don't know, where that transition point is, or really how to go about doing it.
And is that driven by the profile of the beach as
Right.
well? That,
Yeah.
If you survey the beach, well, maybe it makes sense to do it here, but we can't really do it here. We have to do something different there. And that's all.
Absolutely.
So, am I thinking correctly in
Yes.
sync with the common
Yes.
school? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking too, like as you build up, your primary dune, then you're creating some back barrier so that you can create some of that maritime forest and put some shrubs in the swales and help to build up some other areas of the island, which adds more stability to the system overall. And I was wondering too, like with the planting that's been done, have you guys kind of documented which species were going where, or is it pretty much uniform with beach grass? Or
No, the town works with Steve Mercer. Do you know
Okay.
him?
Mm-mm.
Coastal Transplants. No, and there's usually a ratio. It's like 80% sea oats, 10% bitter panicum, 10%. They have ratio, and they'll step it out every 18 inches or 12 inches. I'd have to go get the. A lot of times I let Steve Mercer kind of handle the details on the dune plantings.
okay,
And
so
what were they called? What were they used? You said coastal transplants? Or?
Yeah, right here.
I could reach out to them for some more of those details, I guess.
Right.
Any other questions on the vegetation or? Okay.
I think we had
Ideas.
talked that a good place to start might be to do some sort of like a drone survey where you actually work with Steve and his team and take some pictures, however you would do that, and come up with here's a baseline snapshot of where we are today, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Might be a good thing to do.
Yeah.
You're
So,
right.
I think we.
Yeah, and I didn't cover that. I think on our first bullet we said aerial drone survey as well, and Oscar mentioned that would be a great thing to do too. And I agree, just to have like, what's the present state? Let's capture that, and then we get it in high
And
resolution.
again, I haven't met Steve and haven't worked with him to know. He may, open up a notebook and pull out some maps and have it already 3/4 of the way there, kind of thing.
Well, and just on another, for the Central Reach permit monitoring, the town does have to do sea beach amaranth monitoring, and we haven't seen it here in 15 years or so, but even then, I mean, you could, if you're going to go do this in the summertime, you could kill that sea beach amaranth kind of monitoring, and it's pretty minor, just kind of look for it. And then even, exotics or invasives and that sort of thing.
Right. Has that been an issue here with any invasives?
Invasives? I'm not sure.
I mean, honestly, I'll take anything that's growing.
Right, but there's some you really don't want, like
Right.
beach vitex, for instance.
We do have a beach vitex program. We do have some, correct, David?
It's very spotty, and it's localized. It's invasive, not naturally invasive. It's been imported and planted, and those locations are few and far between. They're documented and contained, in my opinion, as far as what I know about it.
Okay.
It's not growing wild out on the beach. It hasn't escaped the planter and going down on the beach that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay. I think next is you again.
Working with Dr. Bill Cleary, we did a lot of studies on inlets. So it's not really about how the beaches and the environment moves. It's all about really how the inlet is moving. What's happening to those ebb channels? What's happening to those flood channels? What happens to some of those shoals that are moving around? In many cases, he actually produced an atlas. I think it was from 1950s. I showed it to Dean. Oh, you have a copy of it. The pictorial atlas of North Carolina inlets. I think the most recent one is maybe 1998.
Yes, or 96.
1996. Again, Dr. Cleary is retired now. I did a lot of Barrier Inlet digitizing using GIS and just trying to see how these ebb shoals and ebb channels are changing. And it's really the channel itself that comes out of the inlet that plays a massive role in kind of the erosion that occurs on adjacent shorelines. So for instance, when I looked at, I think it was Charlotte Inlet, when that channel begins to veer towards the west, towards Holden Beach, it creates a shoal in that area, and it actually allows a lot of the beach to creep over time. If that channel begins to veer more towards the adjacent island, then it's not going to provide the same level of protection for Holden Beach, and we'll probably see some kind of erosional pattern. And the thing is, with these channels are constantly kind of moving back and forth. They're trying to find that hydrodynamic balance of where they want to be. It seems like the majority of the time, it's actually the channel is veering towards the east, which is not conducive for beach accretion here. So it's not good for Holden Beach when it's in that position. When it kind of switches and the lobes switch and you get that channel and the delta somewhere else, then you get more of that accretionary pattern. So the idea really behind this is maybe a little bit of an introduction on how these inlets work, what influence they have on shorelines, adjacent shorelines, over different patterns, showing some examples, but also maybe revisiting from 1998 to 2018 and maybe updating some of this atlas and seeing if using GIS techniques and aerial imagery, maybe some satellite imagery, really seeing if there is an influence in the way this channel is moving and what kind of erosion patterns we're seeing here. So it'd be just updating a lot of the material from 1998, maybe looking at the last 20 years to see if we've seen any changes based on the work that Dr. Cleary did back in the days.
And it'd be good to have a stake in the ground at this point before the deepening and widening on one end and before possibly Oak Island does a terminal groin at the end of their island.
Absolutely.
And then I would like to note that Bill Cleary did work with us about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And in terms of that inlet kind of thing, and we did see that. And I would just say, it's when you're talking about if the channel's over here versus over there, I wouldn't really flip-flop it binary accretion erosion. It's almost like erosion, less erosion.
Okay.
But we were kind of seeing that where if the channel is aligned closer to Holden Beach, it's less erosional.
Yes.
But I wouldn't. I think you're over-promising there. If you're like, when it's accretional, it's erosional, because I think both shorelines are basically overall erosional.
Okay.
But even just reducing the erosion rate can be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we should be changing the channel orientation. I'm just saying it's more about kind of the natural variability that we're seeing here. So I think it's. I'm not trying to provide any kind of engineering solution to beach erosion. It's more about the geomorphology and the morphological aspects and the influence that these inlets and channels really have on adjacent shorelines. Sure, maybe less erosion, more erosion, but there is quite a clear pattern there in the 1950s on the position of this channel and kind of the erosion rates that we have seen. So again, it was just an idea of maybe allowing the town to educating, explaining how these tidal inlets works just for your own knowledge, and then just focusing on maybe Lockwood Folly and on Charlotte Inlet, and just seeing, kind of learning about the influence of these inlets moving forward. And then that also helps you understand if we start putting in any kind of, if someone puts in a terminal groin or something else, and you've seen the natural pattern, then over time you might see some significant changes. We don't know. There's lots of unknowns with terminal groins. It depends what kind of engineering approach we take, where we place these things. So then we could look at historical natural change over some kind of anthropogenic change. And I'm sure they've written some kind of impact study. And there must be some kind of potential impact on Holden Beach. If it's adjacent to here, then you can look at what are they predicting and what might actually occur from these things. So,
Oscar, are you familiar with the Division of Coastal Management's proposed revisions to the erosion rates and the extension of the inlet hazard areas? That is, I guess it's in a draft form, is forthcoming. I don't know exactly what type of science that they used. I'm assuming it's some type of satellite imagery, and I don't know what the time frame that is there. Of course, we have skin in the game on any changes to erosion rates and also the extension or contraction of inlet hazard areas, however they may finally
The
be defined,
definitions.
however that may end up being defined.
Yep.
I have to assume that there was some type of satellite imagery involved in that. So I'm interested in the erosion rates and how that would occur for Holden Beach. Just go ahead and register that.
I think, absolutely.
Because depending on how it finally ends up, a second opinion and backup data may be helpful for us.
Okay, yeah. Again, it's more localized. The nice thing
And that's our whole issue with inlet hazard areas being defined as a statewide measure.
Okay.
We've been able to avoid a one-size-shoe-fits-all approach historically, and I just want to make sure that whenever a final analysis comes out, that we're not faced with that type of scenario again.
Okay. Yeah, again, we have the tools and instruments at our disposal at the university. We have high-resolution RTK GPS equipment. We can easily run profiles. I'm sure ATM has a long history of that, but if we needed some kind of complementary data or specific areas, we're relatively close by, we have students. Again, that's something we could discuss with ATM. We certainly don't have any intention to step on anyone's toes. It's more, the idea is really about complementary work, where we can assist the town amongst ourselves. We're certainly not, looking to buy work. It's more these collaborations and relationships and research really that we're particularly interested in, and that's where really we come from.
So am I hearing, David, I love this report because they kept it simple basically, but they, spelled out here's where things are accreting, here's where it's eroding. Extend this kind of report for our two inlets and our island to the inlet hazard areas. So build, use this as the foundation, but extend it to include that kind of data. Where are the inlet hazard areas today? We see this kind of erosion accretion. It could impact us this way going forward, kind of thing.
And actually, with some of this,
that's what I'm feeling.
Yes.
We have an initiative at the moment with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Digital Globe, which is they have really high resolution satellite imagery. We're talking 50 centimeter resolution. So we're working closely with the Army Corps of Engineers to be able to bring in some of these aerial photographs, high resolution satellite and aerial, and we can use GIS tools to really digitize these shorelines and look at erosion rates, which I'm sure ATM is already doing. In many cases, obviously, it's going to be very important from a coastal engineering perspective. But if there's any way of complementing this or focusing on certain areas, then we're certainly keen to assist with that. We have the high-resolution in situ instruments which we can ting. It's like a motorcycle with a GPS, and you just walk along, and it gives really high resolution, a few centimeter accuracy anywhere you run these lines. So the way technology has really improved is just incredible. I mean, I remember back in the days we'd still be measuring stuff, and we'd be looking through and writing notes. Now I just turn on the machine, put the tablet, it connects to a local reference station, turn it on, and I just run the wheel down the beach, and I've got 100 points within 5 minutes. So there's different levels of accuracy. If we're interested in RTK GPS, we can use that. If we use aerial imagery, we can use that. When we use satellite imagery, we can go back in time. So again, these are discussions we can have with ATM and the council and whatever you're really interested in. So again, just another initiative. I would be happy to help in any way with some of the monitoring. And then finally, we use, again, a Coastal Ocean Research Monitoring Program. We have several buoys located along southeast North Carolina. We have Sun 2, that's the blue dot on the top right corner, the blue dot right off of Sunset Beach. There's actually a meteorological station, oceanographic buoy out there. I don't know if you might even be able to see it in some cases. That's providing information about wave heights, wave direction, wind speed, wind direction, wave period. We have salinity, we have temperature, we have a whole host of different parameters that are being uploaded into the public domain. And we've been collecting, I think for the Sunset Beach, I think they've been collecting information at least for 5 years. I'd have to look back at it. The example on the bottom, the graph we're looking at on the bottom, we're looking at wind speed over a 1-year period. So that's from March 1st to 2018 through March 1st, almost, obviously we're not there yet, 2019. And then you can see there's a peak there. I'm sure all of you can guess where that peak is from, right around September. Obviously Hurricane Florence. So the idea here is we can go back, collect a lot of the meteorological station, information, the oceanographic station, provide tables, look at frequencies of these things, what are the medians, what are maximums, minimums. How does this tie together perhaps in some of the beach erosion loss that we, or beach accretion or loss? Maybe might be some kind of relationships between, well, there should be relationships between wave heights and beach erosion. So perhaps the idea is a lot of this stuff is very complementary with each other. So we're not looking at individual pieces to work on. It's more kind of a holistic approach. And so these are some of the ideas. There's also another station, that's the U.S. Army Corps. That's the green one we're looking at. And again, they've been collecting data. So it's going back as long as we have records and providing a summary of some of this information. And obviously providing that to ATM if they were to need it for any reason. They probably already have a lot of, obviously very important from a coastal engineering perspective to have a lot of this information. The idea is if the town would be interested in going back and providing a report about these different parameters and maybe tying that into some of the beach erosion stuff. So just to give you the knowledge of what's happening right out here in kind of a synthesized manner. So it'd be basically a data analysis going back in time, looking at potentially both buoys. A lot of the advantages from this is, as Fran can attest, is a lot of this stuff is used for numerical modeling. Different packages used. You include your bathymetry, you include your met-ocean data, and you run these models to really see what kind of energy is reaching the beach, what kind of a whole host of wave heights and dissipation. And, so again, very, very important information. And again, I think it's having that ownership as a town of what's going on right out here, I think is again, very valuable if you don't already have it, or it's not out there for you. So again, that's something I've shared with Dean. I gave him the links. There you go. But there's a lot of information in there. So the idea would be that we can use some students and kind of synthesize it and look at relationships.
Can you talk, is the green dot the frying pan buoy?
That's the U.S. Army Corps 41108. I think that's just offshore from Frying Pan.
Okay.
There is a contour plot in there, so we could see exactly where it is. Unfortunately, I'm covering it with the label. I wanted to keep the blue one there for reference.
Are those two buoys? I know they're existing resources. In your opinion, would those two buoys, are they optimally positioned to capture what's going on to Holden Beach? And my real question is, what's involved with buying our own buoy, setting it up, and positioning it in an optimal way?
Okay.
Not knowing anything about what those buoys look like, or any of the back side of that question.
Okay. Going to your first question, I think the fact that you do have buoys locally is fantastic. It would be great if the one in front of Sunset Beach was located, if someone could go and just kind of tow it. Oops, sorry, fishermen, by accident we pulled it over here. That would be fantastic. I think the fact that we have a deeper water one and a near shore one is very, very valuable. Going back to your second question, I think it would be quite expensive to get one of these meteorological. You need lots of maintenance. You need oceanographic professionals to go out there. I think they are very expensive if we're looking at the same kind. So again, this was a multi-million-dollar initiative that UNCW is running. So we have a specific team of oceanographers and engineers who go and maintain these things all the time. You have to upload the data. You have to go and collect it. You have to fix it. So
So it's self-contained. Those buoys don't transmit in real time.
They do,
Oh, they do?
yes,
Okay.
but they still need lots of maintenance.
I got you. And the Sunset Beach buoy, I know the frying pan one is a core buoy, but is
Yes.
the Sunset Beach also a core buoy?
No, that's part of the Coastal Ocean Research
Okay, I
Monitoring
missed
Program.
that. Okay.
And again, the image we're looking at on the bottom, that is from the Sun 2 wave buoy. So the data we're looking at on the bottom. So that's the local wave buoy that we're looking at. So I was able to extract that information. I went in and created a graph just to illustrate some of the data that it does provide.
Any insight as to how Sunset Beach was selected as the site for that? I know that it is at the terminus of Long Bay, and pretty much Frying Pan is the other terminus, and that might have been part of it.
I don't know offhand.
Okay.
I don't know why they chose that. It might be close. Maybe it's close to the state line. It might be the fact that we have Bird Island there and some conservation areas. Perhaps they had some kind of influence and said we'd be interested in some of this. There could be a whole variety of reasons. I can certainly reach out to just Dr. Leonard and find. I think it's an interesting question. Why do they place them exactly where they? It might have something to do with the bathymetry or the sediments, or maybe it was an ideal location to place.
Well, there is a jetty at Little River.
Okay. And I think, and again, we can, like I said, we can compare that with beach erosion data. Gives you an understanding of, how frequent are these storms, how often do they occur, what are some of the maximum wind speeds you can expect here, what's the average wind speed. So it's just kind of some data crunching and providing kind of a synthesis report for that.
Again, it would be a good reference baseline for the town as well.
Yeah.
We go back 10 or 20 years.
Exactly.
Here's how many storms have happened. Here's where we had breaches. This is how much it cost us.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So for the commissioners, they have that data set to be able to plan for the future. You
Yeah,
can expect,
Yeah.
over the course of the next 5 years, 10 years, this many storms of this magnitude kind of thing.
Yeah, and nor'easters obviously play a role also. So it's not only hurricanes and tropical storms, nor'easters, I'm sure can have quite an effect depending on what direction they approach from. So again, I think that's all the slides we
Can
have.
you say anything about grant kind of money and
Oh.
how, what's the timeline involved with grant money and how would we go after it?
I'm glad you brought that up. There was that community collaboration grant. I forget which one it was. I'd have to go back. There's a deadline for that I think it was March 15th. I forget what the maximum fund was. I don't know if it was maybe around $15,000, or we can go back and check that. Excuse me. But there are lots of these community collaborative grants that do come. We just, Sherry and I actually applied for one yesterday with the U.S. Coastal Research Program, looking at some different initiatives.
I actually put in what's called an SOI, which is a statement of interest, and hopefully they'll invite me to write a proposal. But it was from the Army Corps of Engineers, actually, and it was long-term coastal restoration. And I wrote in there, as part of our objectives would be to collaborate with the town of Holden Beach to work on restoration and develop some guidance on long-term restoration planning. So if they ask me for a proposal, I will certainly be reaching out more to think about what we can put in that.
So yeah, we feel it's very important. It's very good for Sherry and I to be able to apply for grants and get community collaboration. So it's not only coming to towns and asking for a handout. It's more about kind of these partnerships, bringing in students, doing the research. We already have a salary. We're not really in it to make lots of money. It's more again, just collaborating with towns, and it's very well looked by with the university. So if there's any way where the town doesn't have to spend a dime, and we can get the money through a grant, then we're all jumping up and down.
Yeah.
So.
But for the community one, it sounds like we should either send that along and kind of get some sort of email going to see, hey, should we apply for this?
Yeah.
Kind of get that moving.
We can do that when we leave. We can send that forward and we can have a look at it. I think it has the limit on the funds and again some of the ideas, perhaps one of these initiatives, or if Sherry's comes through, then, there's, the funds already there to support us and the students and everything else, so we don't need to be going into your kitty.
When you email that, would you be willing to also send your presentation as a link?
Absolutely.
You can actually take it too if you want on the flash drive I gave you. You can just slide it over to your system.
Take a copy of it.
Yeah, just go ahead and take a copy.
You can copy it, absolutely.
Yeah.
I got that.
Yeah.
Is this the end?
Yep. That is the end. Any other questions on that or comments?
No.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was all very exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Very Oh, there was the beach tour. I think you didn't have time for a beach tour today, and we didn't work it in the logistics of that. Is that something, Christy and David, we could set up in the future?
Absolutely.
When you guys are both available and are, again, you hear we have so much going on here in the town as well, so it's a matter of matching schedules up and then getting you guys to come back down again for a beach tour. They give a fantastic ride on the beach.
Yeah, they do.
Can help with a lot of questions and that sort of thing.
That's great. We also, I think we ran for Hurricane Matthew, I think we did pre and post storm profiles. I think we included Holden Beach, so I'll make sure I pull that out also and pass that on to you for you to just see, probably compliments. I'm sure ATN might have something there. We try to target before and after storms, really to see what the specific impact of one storm is, rather than I know the Army Corps and maybe certain other themes that you usually come after the storm, and then you look at how that's changed over the last year. We're really interested in kind of that specific time frame. How has it changed in 1 week? And then you can come back and look at kind of that recovery period over time. So I'll make sure I pull out the Holden Beach profiles if we have them, and I'll just send them to you. Feel free to have them. We also did grain size analysis before and after storms, so we can look at what influence the sand has on kind of storm impact.
Very good.
I'll make sure. So we have a couple of actions.
Oh, I brought that.
Oh, you brought it. Okay, I've been wanting to get this book actually.
I love it.
It's great.
I love it. It's great.
Okay.
Because we've been talking about vegetation and it's got so much information in
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And is this something I can get a copy of at some point? Or
I think we got an extra copy of it.
Yeah, actually, I think you can get this online.
Spencer Rogers wrote that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. It's a C grant
Yeah.
publication.
Write that down and it'll tell you where to get it online.
Okay.
If you don't want a hard copy.
UNCW probably get one for free.
Yeah, I'm sure. Spencer probably has it in his office.
Yeah,
You can probably get one from Spencer at Center for Marine Science. So I know Spencer really well.
Okay, thank you.
He's our resident coastal engineer.
Thank you. Yep, perfect.
What she's referring to is the Dune workshop that we had talked about last month. It's March 9th, so I just printed the flyer out to talk about later. So, Okay.
So I have a couple of action items in there. I'll make sure I revisit that Holden Beach information, and we'll make sure we look at that community grant and pass that on.
Okay, very good.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, should we move on to agenda item number 6? Thank you so much. Fran, you're up.
Okay, should we stay or?
It's-
Yes?
It's your call. We're working on a long-term plan
Okay.
for the beach that we hope to have completed in 6 months.
Okay, I
And
think-
we're starting today.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should. We're certainly interested.
Well, hello. I'm just going to introduce Kathy here. Kathy, do you want to come up and introduce yourself? Actually, she's been working. She's a planner, and she works a lot with coastal resiliency and a lot of just resiliency planning. And she's been a planner and facilitator for about 20 years now.
More than.
More than
Good
20.
hair color. I mean, that's great.
Well, so yes, please, Kathy. And then we work with her a lot, and she does this a lot. So here
You're
we
so
go.
cute. Yeah. Fran's like, what do you do, Kath? What do you do? So I'm kind of laughing because you've had a geologist, an ecologist, an engineer, and now you have the planner. So you've got quite the little crew this morning. And honestly, I'm the policy wonk. I love to write strategies, policies, plans. So, yay! That's Fran's like, thank God. So, just quickly, a little bit more about me. I'm sorry, I'm not used to So my career started early 2000s, Florida-based, community planning. So I worked with a lot of local governments on redevelopment plans and special area plans. So that was pre-recession. That's when everything was booming and we're like, what do we do? How do we have an identity, etc. So that was good until about 2008. Then I transitioned into water resources, doing water quality water supply plan for the water management district in Florida and the Department of Environmental Protection because that was the recession. There wasn't a lot of site development, land development. So it was actually a good segue. That's where I started also working on some of the coastal management aspects for the local governments. So it's been a perfect fit working with Fran and back in the private sector at the ATM. So that's just a little bit about my background. Team. For this plan, of course, you have myself, Fran will be our technical lead, and then we also have Mark Gold, who is an engineer in our office who's on Fran's team. So we're going to be your core hub through the next 6 months as we prepare this. So what we wanted to present to you, we're considering this our kickoff meeting, the first of 4 real hardcore, let's get some planning work done meeting. So these were the concepts that Fran and I wanted to present to you today, get your feedback. Got my pen ready. So the first thing is I want to state that this is very much an iterative process. This is your plan. You're going to be taking ownership of it and presenting it with us to your commissioners. So you are the primary stakeholders as well as, of course, the community. So I wanted to make that very clear. That's why we're here. That's why Fran has me facilitating, because this cannot be a plan without your input. So I wanted to stress that very much so. 10-year planning horizon. We think beyond 10 years it becomes a little, like my jargon, loosey-goosey. So within the 10 years, we want to set up 5-year and 10-year strategies, projects. So we're calling those our short-term, long-term strategies. The first 5 years we consider similar to a local government CIP program. And I guess one of the components I want to stress is as we're writing this, we want to write it so that it can be adaptively managed. So even though we have a 10-year period, each year we can take a fresh look at it, see what's changed. If we have another hurricane or two, have the regulations change, things like that. So I don't want it to be a plan that just sits on the shelf and says, hey, we did it. We want this to be very adaptive and user-friendly. So I guess one of the other things to mention is we will use the 2009 Beach Management Plan as a resource. It has really good data and nuggets in it, but it will not be the framework. This framework going forward, which actually at the March meeting, I'll provide an outline, which will pretty much serve, hopefully, as our table of contents of how it will be organized. And you'll see that it'll be quite different than the 2009 plan. And of course, we're going to focus on the inlets this time, as well as the ocean front. So, any initial thoughts, ideas, feedback?
Yeah, I believe that we've collected some initial concepts from
Yes,
the
I
board.
have those.
Okay, all right.
I have those. And what I'm doing is I'm going to roll those together and look at those as well as some of the other plans that I've written and provide, like I said, the outline / framework to you next month. Because we don't want to get too far down the path of trying to flesh this out without concurrence that we are on the right path.
And just in terms of a timing
Yes.
thing, you know, we have to do the public records and getting the agendas out. It would probably be very beneficial that the sooner you get those to us, that the board has opportunity
Yes, sir.
to digest the proposed, so that they're ready to come in. And perhaps if you actually, when we get the skeleton from you, give some direction of what your expectations on the feedback from this
Okay.
group are. I mean, is that,
So,
Yeah.
week, 2 weeks before your meetings, what's a good time frame? Just so I can.
Well, I think you'll get better feedback from us if we get it earlier so that we can
Okay.
all study it and digest it and come up with our questions and comments. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I agree. That's why I was just wondering how far in advance is a week too close?
I think a week is enough.
A week, 2 weeks?
Okay, because I've noticed in the past when I've done on other plans, if I'm more than a week out, then it gets kind of buried a lot.
Sure.
So, okay, I will do that. So 1 week prior, I will give you your homework assignment.
So our next scheduled meeting this is actually a special meeting.
Right.
We normally meet towards the end of the month. Our next one is March 28th, so we'd be looking at March 21st, in that range.
Okay. First deadline, March 21st for the March 28th meeting. Perfect. Anything else for the overall concept? So far, so good?
Yeah. On your outline,
Yes.
you have the one that we talked about. I just wanted to,
Mhm.
did you see where we're kind of coming from with the different parts of our beach and how they're managed?
Differently.
Yeah, and so we'd really like to have that.
Yes. So what you're going to have, of course, is an overall map showing
Right.
the geography and.
I may have been.
No,
outline
that's
it.
fine. That's fine. It's great. So these are the geographic areas that we're going to address, and we're going to have an overall at-a-glance map. But you're right. Each one of these needs to be looked at individually.
Okay.
The opportunities, the constraints, what will work short term, long term. So even though they're in one plan, they're going to be looked at individually. And one thing that Fran and I talked about this morning is we don't have West End specifically identified.
Yeah.
We will have that. It's
Okay.
going to be more of an acknowledgement because we don't think that we're going to have to do as much research and data collection on.
I have a slide. I have some slides after this.
Okay.
And it just basically shows the west end, the western 3 miles beaches is accretional. The 1993 aerial and the 2016 aerial, it's accretional. Recently, there have been some erosion into the scarps and that sort of thing, and some loss of some dune walkovers. But it's still a very healthy, and the dune system's 600 feet wide in some of those areas over there. And so that's where we're talking about, maybe the scrub shrub, the secondary, the tertiary dunes. So we will advise that, but we can maybe even set in something. But it's still, I went back and looked, and Pat's been here, and she's really been kind of making sure that we don't forget about the West End. And so we're looking there, and it still looks like a really healthy, it's kind of an unmanaged area.
Yeah.
But we'll include that in there. But it just doesn't look like it needs as much active management.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The next meeting is the 28th.
Right, March 28th?
Yeah. Could I ask that from an administrative process standpoint, if you send that up here on the 21st, that's a few of those days are weekends.
Okay.
And
So
if we could get that to Christie on the 18th, we can administratively make sure that the agendas are correctly assembled and put forth.
yes,
Okay.
it shall be done, and I'll use that time frame for the next several months. Okay. Perfect.
And can we get a copy of your slides?
Oh yes.
Okay, great.
Mhm. And I just have one more slide if we don't have any other conversation about the geographic areas that we're going to be thinking through.
So we've got our geographic areas, and then we would have our goals for each of those sections, correct?
What we intend is to have presiding goals, what the
Okay.
intention of the overall plan is, not just for the oceanfront, but for the inlet. So some
Okay.
prevailing goals for the entire area. And then, correct, for each section, we're going to have goals and objectives. And rather than, I don't want to call them policies like a comp plan, but strategies So goals, objectives, strategies for each of the sections.
So David, this is where we would put in our questions about the western part, trying to convert that into an engineered beach, what's involved.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Okay. Is that good for you?
Mhm.
Last slide, our timeline. So kickoff, data collection is actually commencing as of this week since our meeting got bumped up. So as I mentioned, we'll come back in March with, well, of course you'll get it before, what we're considering our outline / framework, our data collection that we've done to date by that the March meeting, our sources to date, but also as we look through those sources to get further guidance from you of two other. That's something that I've learned through the planning process. There's so much information that you just don't know at the onset. So we'll talk about that in March as well. So the goal is to have a first real draft for you fleshed out in May. And then that'll give us 2 more months between May and July to finalize the plan with adoption hopefully by your board in August at the latest, perhaps even July. So that keeps us within the 6-month footprint.
Yep.
Did I miss anything?
No. And I have about 10 slides, and then it's more about, what's been happening over the last 10 years, just the basic kind of overall summary.
And I muffed it up, Christy.
Is it? I don't know if it's queued up.
Yeah.
It's under that, and the new flash drive. We got the E, I think. And then our HB. And then the other one.
So I'll just run through it. This is just kind of just a general overview of
Can you go in slide mode?
yeah.
There we go.
So, and I know the commissioners and everyone's seen some of these slides before. This is kind of on the east end, and this is where some of the 80s and 90s erosion. This is a Bill Cleary from the Beach and Inlet Management Plan from 10 years ago or so. This is kind of why the town is doing this. The town was in bad shape from an erosional point of view in the 80s and 90s. I think it's always just a good idea to kind of remember, what you don't want the beach to go back to looking like. The regional net transport is east to west in this area, and then here's actually there's another Bill Cleary thing. The offshore is basically kind of sand stars, where you've got hard bottoms, variable thick, sediment cover, interbedded gravel, sand, and mud. So there's not a whole lot of offshore sand, but we know there is some. The Central Ridge project was successful. North Myrtle Beach has a similar offshore geology, and there you can find some sand, but it is more difficult. It's not as easy as it's just going out to Jaybird Shoals. The beach, the town has been doing a great job for almost the last 20 years on staying ahead of the background erosion, and we've seen this. You've seen this a lot. The 3 main reaches we have obviously the east end, which is the most highly erosive, the quote-unquote central reach, and then we have the unmanaged area up to the west. And you can see all these little bars are the nourishments that have occurred in this area. And you can see, the east end gets hit, almost every other year. Whilst the central reach got hit, we got the big nourishment in 2001 for the Wilmington Harbor deepening. And then since then, the town has been, putting some stuff here or there. And then this is the Central Reach project that was just done a couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago. And that was, the 1.3 million cubic yards, and that was the most the town's put on the beach. And since the 2009 plan, the beach has been doing great. Even the east end, that's erosional. The last 10 years, the beach has been doing pretty well, despite all the hurricane activity.
Don't you think that's because of the orientation of the inlet?
No, I think it helps.
I
do think it helps. And keeping it over here, it helps, but it's basically in the bend widener, I think, really did it, where basically the pre-2009, they were putting maybe about 80,000 cubic yards of material on the beach And then all of a sudden, the economic stimulus in 2009, then all of a sudden they put about 150,000, and then the town started using the piggyback more,
Right.
and so it was almost put in about twice the volume on that east end, and then the central reach kind of just influx, and then you got the sand spreading from both sides of that, so that it was like the bend widener and the central reach, I think, have really been helping. But I do think that the channel alignment, the town, you should keep it lobbied to get it to over on this side of the channel, and I think it has been shown to lessen erosion and to provide some sort of additional protection. And then here's just the west end accretion figure, and here's that 2016 aerial up here, and there's the 2012 dune tow line, and here's that 1993 area. You can see kind of how much healthier the dune system here is in 2016 versus 1993. And even up over here where there was no development, now there is development. But you know, the beach, it's really clear that 2016 aerial is much nicer than the 1993. So you know, we are hearing more reports of dune scarping and some erosion on that west end. But then all of a sudden you look at an aerial like this and you're like, that's a pretty healthy west end. So we can talk about you know, a little more active management to that side, but it's doing pretty well itself. And Sherry, you can kind of see even back in here on this aerial, you can see there's some more shrubby dunes like maritime forest back in here. You can see it here and here, and you know, so this line, there is some stuff happening. You can see actually some swimming pools are way out here, but you can see it's trying to do it naturally, and maybe trying to just kind of advance that succession.
Right.
And that's kind of where we were thinking on the west end.
You're saying west end, is this like more south?
Yeah, this is basically
I was
facing.
looking at the island and I thought I saw.
Yeah, right. Like even if you look back at this, the chart right here, it's basically east and it's almost exactly east and west.
Oh,
So.
okay.
We won't get into all this. We have before, but basically there's the Lockwood Folly Inlet. There's the AIWW portion, and then we saw the Merit out there doing the side casting out here. The Merit's out here side casting. So they basically have those two portions, and then this is the collision regulation line for the Coast Guard, the COLREG line, which severely limits what kind of dredges can work out here versus what can work in there. And the AIWW dredges can't work out here. And so it gets complex, and there's a few different projects that are going on there, but and obviously the board and the commissioners have all been working on this. Bar area alternative, just really quickly, upland. The town has successfully done some upland projects. The last one was 2009. Dredge spoil islands, there's the Monk's Island, Sheep Island and Monk Island. Is it Monk or Monks? Monk. Then we have, you know, obviously Lockwood Folly Inlet, and we have offshore. And then, you know, Shallotte Inlet has pretty much always been kind of Ocean Isles kind of thing, but now the kind of Oak Islands kind of started kind of claiming Lockwood Folly Inlet. Does the town of Holden Beach want to try to get into something with Shallotte? Yeah, it could get a little more complex, I guess.
Sand grab.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we paid for all that sand.
yeah, right. This was just the Central Reach project. This is kind of where it went, and this was just a couple years ago. Historically, there was Mary's Inlet that breached back maybe 50 years ago, Hurricane Hazel, and Bacon Inlet. Some historic breaches where maybe kind of quote unquote weak or skinny sections of the island that maybe are a little more vulnerable to breaching. But obviously so we can look back at that, some historical stuff, and even some of the stuff that Dr. Cleary's done.
Just to give y'all an idea of where those two inlets are, they're the exact same location that our lift stations are. So lift station at near Greensboro Street and the lift station at the 800 block. It's because it's, the reason is we have a vacuum assisted gravity sewer system, and those are the lowest elevations at the inlets. So,
What is the list, sorry?
sewer lift stations.
Lift station, oh, sorry. Lift station.
And I will tell you that as far as being narrow and fragile in those areas,
It comes right up to the road.
and with a really high tide, like what we'll probably have next week, that marsh is full. It's right to the road almost, and then that stretch of beach is narrow too.
And
And the dunes are not that high.
we've actually got topo surveys at those specific points from marsh to beachfront, and that may be good data to put into that plan.
Okay.
Chris Stanley did us back
Okay.
when we were working on our sewer elevation project. We actually ran some topo lines just to see what the volumetric in front of those sewer lift stations were. So
Okay.
I don't know if I'm getting way out
No,
of
that's
place
good.
there,
That's
but
a good ad.
It's
that's,
really important because that
that's
is
a
our,
storm damage kind of thing.
Sure.
that's our infrastructure there.
And then also on this, it says the Army Corps of Engineers, the GRR extents. This was, and I guess is that project kind of coming back to life, or you don't know? That was basically the Brunswick County Beaches project, and you can obviously see that we did think that their alignment was pretty good, and the town pretty much we followed that. The Central Reach project mimicked what the Corps wanted to do. The Corps wanted to put a lot more sand. But they were going to get it from Frying Pan Shoals, I think. But and that's kind of just another element, which it's a moving target, obviously, as most of the stuff is. So we're going to do our best, and that's why a 10-year plan is probably the maximum you can get, because there's just so many other things we don't have control over. Here's just some of the offshore stuff, and here you have Holden Beach. And the Corps, and then all these dots here are VibraCore borings that the Corps has done, most of the Corps. So you can see basically where there's more borings, you can see that they had, ideas, or they thought, where the stuff was going. And then these are some offshore, the Corps paid for some seismic geotechnical studies. And so you see that off of Holden Beach, there's actually not a whole lot, but we don't know, what, there could be more here, but they definitely were focusing more on western Oak Island, offshore there. And then here you can see this is the 3 nautical mile limit right here. And so they're actually a little bit beyond that, and so you're getting into BOEM territory there. But BOEM does seem to have their act together in terms of sand sourcing now, where previously you had to fill out prospecting permits and things like that to go out and take sand samples, and now they're a lot more amenable to, they're using their beyond 3 nautical miles, they're using that area for sand nourishment projects a lot more than they were even 15 years ago. So there's a lot of data out there, but and when we did all this for the Central Reach project, and then this was from the Board of Commissioners PowerPoint in 2009. We ultimately ended up using this area over here, this 1A in front of Oak Island, but we had some other areas that had some promise. Unfortunately, this bar area 3, this only had a few different VibraCores, so and this one had a few. This one had a lot. And this one was up in here, was called the Cleary Bar area. We were a little farther offshore than the Cleary Bar area.
Actually, we ran the surveys in 1999. We ran the full geophysical, geotechnical promotion all the way almost to sunset. So we got all the side scan, cores, and we spent about a week just trawling 24 hours and running diving surveys and all the geophysical. So it's very patchy.
So is it additional to kind of what I showed? How were you doing, 2 to 3 miles?
We went out to about 30-foot contours.
Okay.
30-foot contours.
So that's not
So mostly shore face,
Yes.
surf zone beyond.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I'd say easily.
And do you do seismic
Yes.
You do? Okay.
So, and side scan. And
Okay.
Viper course. We actually dove and collected the Viper course.
Oh, you did?
Diving course with Cleary himself. He'd still go down diving, and we'd collect 10, 12-foot course. And
10 or 12, really?
Pull them up, put them on the vessel with grad students.
And a lot of times here, I think if you only, because I think for the Viber course for the town, we were only getting about 5 foot of recovery anyway. Because
But some examples, places we would get up to 10
okay,
foot
yeah,
course,
because
we'd
I
be
think
on the bottom and haul
yeah.
these things up from the sea. It's pretty
yeah, this little area right here, this unfortunately that's in front of Ocean Isle, but you can tell by all the points there. And this was like a little pocket, and we think that's probably pretty good material. It's just interesting. The whole beach really hasn't been studied much when both the oak and ocean definitely have a little more data. Here's another. This is from the 2010. This is a pre-application scoping meeting, and it's just another. It's the same kind of data, and just looking at where we are, and just going offshore because that's basically where you need to get 1 million cubic yards of material. Truck hauling that is just not possible. The truck haul project that the town done was about 200,000. And then here again for volumes, when you're talking offshore, you're always talking big numbers. 1 million, 2 million cubic yards, or at least more than 500,000. And then just another quick image. I think we already went over that. Here's the Murden project. We've talked about this before as well. This was 2016, I think, where they basically load the hopper up over here, and then they were disposing it over here, just actually right off the bridge here in the town hall. It was about 30,000 cubic yards of material. We didn't really see a whole lot because it's just tough. It's in about 15 feet of water. It's it's like 2 feet high up. Piles of sand 2 feet high. It's just really tough to kind of figure out like what kind of effect that's having on the shoreline with just measured data. We can even talk a little bit more about that. But it was just in terms of volume and putting it in 15 feet of water versus on the beach. It's not if they're going to use the Murden, if they're going to dredge that, this is probably the best thing for them to do, and the town should continue to lobby them to do that. But there's not a whole lot of value we were finding. But I'm sure there's some.
Better than the Merit.
Yes. Yeah, better than just spewing it 100 feet one direction.
I think maybe the one concern, which I presume if you do have any kind of hard bottom reefs that provide important biodiversity and fisheries and everything else, you don't really want to be dumping a bunch of sand on those things. So I think just from a kind of environmental perspective, you'd want to make sure that it's not a biologically important area that's contributing to your fisheries and to the health of kind of your water. So running a simple side scan sonar you can easily determine whether there's any kind of hard bottom there. You probably want to avoid these things because they are very valuable, and I think people kind of overlook the value of these hard bottoms. But I think from a biodiversity, we know where our corals are going nowadays. So I think just protecting these features, I think, should be quite important.
And the Corps actually did do that for their GRR study. They wanted to do a 50-year project, a coastal storm damage reduction project for Holden Beach and for Oak Island, and it just didn't go anywhere. But they did a whole lot of studying and analysis, and they did a near-shore hard bottom and those kind of things. But I guess I'll take that. And I think and these are some of the potential historic upland bar areas. The town owns the turkey trap site back up here, and that hasn't been used, and it's still a great emergency source of sand. And so it's a good thing, it's a really good thing that the town has it. This was a Smith bar site up here, and it was good material in that sense. The trip site, was on the other side of 17. It had really nice sand, but getting across 17 and everything, and just the farther away the upland truck haul place is, it gets a lot more expensive. This is Oyster Harbor, and that was historic use, and the town used that. And then the Seascape Marina over here. So just, upland, it isn't kind of a top priority, but it is a valuable thing to have, and the town does have that.
Yeah.
Just always keeping an eye out on upland sources. I think this is just an image of some I think it's a 2008 to 2009 truck haul here on Holden Beach. And the material it's not as nice as the offshore material, and it does take a little bit of time to kind of get a little to bleach out a little bit more. And then costs, and then costs are going to be a huge issue with the long-term planning, and we're going to focus on that. And then this, even the FEMA costs, and the town's got. As soon as the dredgers know it's a FEMA project, I swear they just up their costs a little bit. Like instead of a $3 million mobilization, it's a $5 million mobilization because they know FEMA's picking up 75% of that. So the dredging market it varies wildly. Where people are getting, and there's all like $25 a cubic yard or almost $8 a cubic yard. The town got really favorable rates for the Central Reach project, but it's just a crapshoot, and it's all over the place, and it's dredge demand and which hurricanes hit where. But we will definitely include costs, and it's obviously because it's very important. And then this is just an example from the BIM study that found that the estimated annual total impact for Holden Beach was $92.9 million. And that's just annual, and it accounted for 1,000, almost 1,300 jobs. Basically, the NC BIM, the Beaches Inlet Management Plan, did a lot of economic analysis and cost benefit, and the benefits always vastly outweigh the costs,
right.
and we just always want to keep that in mind as well. I think that's and then funding. I think this is the last slide. Funding. There's some more grants now with the state. We have the dredging related fund. The Beach Nourishment Fund has been started, but it hasn't really been funded, or it doesn't have a dedicated funding mechanism yet. The county seems to be, 10 years ago, the county was really not interested in beach management at all, and now all of a sudden the county is. So they're kind of a new player. And then the federal, FEMA, the Corps, they're kind of a moving target as well. But we're going to get into funding and grants and that sort of thing.
Like I'm pitching.
Yep.
So NOAA has a lot of more coastal resiliency grant opportunities now, as well as NIFWIF, the National Fish Wildlife Federation. So I think we'll be able to think a little bit broader outside the box when we come up with our funding opportunities as part of the plan.
Yeah, sure. And then because all these, there's definitely grants and everything. We'll cast a wide net and really try to make sure that we're maximizing that resource.
I think working with UNCW would help us get exposure as
Yes.
well, because I assume they would carry the message, anything they learn here at Holden to other communities and that sort of thing.
Well, yes, for that as well as writing down a lot when Jerry was talking about the dune restoration. That's going to be some of our short-term strategies, I'm sure. So we'll definitely incorporate and overlap our efforts. That's great. The timing of this is perfect.
I'm also really interested in more looking maybe longer than 10 years out from a resiliency standpoint, knowing that we wouldn't be able to really address this, but I am concerned about where we're headed long term.
Sea level rise perspective,
Yes.
like those 2 points where we had breaches, you talked about they're still very low. What do you do to build those up so they're not?
Right. And not just those points, but I think we want to try and raise our whole island as much as we can, to help. Like the stuff that the Corps was doing down in Georgia, that the engineering with nature website, are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. Some of those strategies, I just feel like that for what we're really looking at here, 10 years is a good horizon, but I also think that we need to be thinking long term. We can't wait 10 years and start.
Is there contemplation to doing a parallel vulnerability assessment that usually looks beyond the 10 years, that contemplates the sea level rise and the infrastructure impacts where we were talking about the sewer lift stations and things? I think if you do that as almost a separate
Yes.
study, there's grant funding for that. It's very popular right now.
Right.
But I think that will also extend the planning horizon. So I'm saying it could be a parallel
Okay.
study with different funding opportunities for you that could actually get more into the sea level rise aspect than what we were planning for the coastal management.
Yes.
Because, just for example, we're doing a couple of those right now where they specifically said, Fran, we want you to do your ad circ modeling. We really want to understand. We don't want just FEMA projections and core projections. We want you to take a look at our beach, our area, localized, use your modeling, and really tell us what is going to happen from that perspective of the tidal surges, the storm surges.
Mhm.
And then once we understand that, take a look at our infrastructure. What is going to be affected?
So, and to be clear, FEMA only uses existing conditions to do their modeling. They don't include any kind of sea level rise at all, and that's kind of legislated that way. So yeah, there are some communities that say, well, wait a second, let's
Shouldn't that be a line item in our plan or one of the items in
It
the table of
definitely can,
contents?
but I'm saying
Okay.
it won't be accomplished as part of your
Yes, gotcha.
management plan.
That makes sense.
It
But
should
it's something
definitely be
we
one of
should,
the strategies or projects
Yep.
that could happen in parallel, and then to the extent of a lot more detail, where you have quantitative and qualitative data to use
Yep.
to make good decisions.
It's also things like living shorelines. I don't know if you
Exactly.
consider those. We have
Yes.
quite a few experts at the university who've gotten lots of grant funding and are working on things. Obviously, that would be more for your kind of back barrier area
Right.
to help stabilize some of the sediment and, maybe vessel traffic and some erosion you might see on the backside. So, those are small pilot initiatives that you could perhaps get started. And again, like I said, we have quite a few
I was
experts.
already writing that down as one of our short-term strategies. Yeah.
so many opportunities.
There are, and honestly, for whatever reason, the political climate is great, federal and even state, where there's money. We need
It's
to
so
tap into
hot
that
right
money.
now, so.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we have too many grants coming.
That's a good problem.
I know it is.
But the important thing, though, is I think we need to recognize it now because it takes so long to see, an impact for any project that we do.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. Oh, it'll definitely be a component of our management plan.
Okay.
And the fact that you're going to have that in your management plan will actually have some of the funding agencies be more receptive.
Yes,
Being-
because we've already identified.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
We can be very strategic.
That's what I want to do.
Well, we might have to get going. I think we both have class at 1 o'clock, so.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. I'll be emailing you.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Can we get a copy of your presentation as well, Fran?
Yep.
Thanks. I love all that data.
Are you an engineer?
Yes.
But you're like me, you go back and you pour over it and come up with as many questions you wish you'd ask. Okay, so, what do we need to do from here? Is just wait.
For Fran and myself, we have our marching orders.
Okay.
So by March 18th, you'll receive your first homework assignment to prep for our March meeting.
Okay.
Thank you for the feedback. I'm feeling good
Yeah.
about where I need to head.
Okay, great.
As a this is a facilitator question, and would you prefer, I'm assuming that the next meeting will be a lot more interactive and collaborative. Would you prefer a better setup than this dais to the floor kind of thing? Would you like the table? We'll just talk offline about what your support requirements are, and we can hopefully make it a bit more collegial, so that because I think that's where we need to be. Okay.
Okay, anybody else have any more questions regarding this? Okay, then we will move on to number 7, which is discussion regarding budget items for FY 19 and 20. Did you want to lead off on your beach map?
Yeah, I'll look at the beach mats that are out on the public beach accesses. We've got, the town owns 16 of them. They range anywhere from 25, I think, to 33 feet long. They can't put them in all the accesses due to the fact that if you go down the east end of the beach, it's too close to the high water line. Some of the accesses have curves in them, and in order to go in, and you'd be digging up vegetation and sand and everything else to put one down. So, I don't think anyone wants to do that. But they are they do help with the trenching. They do stabilize the sand underneath it. And they are very visitor friendly and resident friendly. When you see a poor daddy dragging down a wagon with 3 little bambinos running around behind him, and it does make it easier for them to get out on the beach. Now there is some cost involved with them, not just the cost of the mats, but they have to be maintained. They have to be taken up before a storm. And it's that on the public the public accesses that falls over on the town, and the town does get phone calls about such and such mat at such and such place needs to be cleaned off. I found nothing that would tell us not to use them. The one thing that really, I did a beach tour, or a beach, I won't say a tour, I'd say a ride, with Christy and Rhonda, and we went by every access, and we stopped at every access, and we would look at them, and they would, we kind of made a list and say, we could put a long one here, or we could put a short one here, or we can't put one here, and but when you get out, I'll tell you, when you get out there and you do a beach ride, you get a whole different perspective. And I guess probably one of the biggest things that I did, or that I learned, is that as I was doing this, as I rode down the beach, I'm always looking. I'm looking at, people crossing. Is there a path across a dune? Is the on a private access? Are those steps camera compliant? And I think one area that we probably deserve some more study is the private accesses. Now, private accesses, I'm not going up on a man's property without his permission, but you can tell the majority of them are well taken care of. And the town did approve to put a Moby mat down on the west end for the west end POA. I went down and looked at it. Looks very nice. They've got somebody that can take it up. They've got somebody that can keep it clean. The idea of you've got these private accesses that have 5 houses that use it. Okay, it would probably benefit, if you had a mat, but who's going to take care of it? If there's nobody knows who's going to take care of it, well, when the call comes that it needs to be cleaned, where's it going? right down here. And so, so there's, and then who's going to take them up? Is Billy Bob going to call into town and say, listen, hey, buddy, how you doing? How about taking up that mat down there for me? So there's some issues there. But overall, on the private accesses, it's, I think they fall under the ordinance concerning walkways, and that any mat that needs to be put down, or they want to replace a walkway with a mat, that it's got to go through inspections and count. I mean, I'd say every bit of that needs to go back to the town. But I think it's a good program for the beach. Like I say, I think it's very resident and visitor friendly, and I'd say, we keep the money there and keep doing it.
Okay, so we've got a list of items on our wish list that we wanted to communicate. Should we just keep going through all these and then make a motion that we add those? How would you guys like to handle that?
Yeah, that sounds.
Okay. We also talked about replacing the missing keep off the dune signs.
Yes.
We've talked about, and David, I'm not clear, on the additional monitoring for the west end and the Shalot Inlet. I think we've already agreed to that, but I wasn't sure if we needed to, bring that up again, or you have that covered already.
It won't hurt to bring it up again, just to reinforce that we're going to add transects in both those locations.
Okay. We have plants. Now I have a call in to Steve. Haven't heard back from him, but we kind of talked about this last month. Listening to UNCW, though, I would really like to hear what their thoughts on it are too.
So UNCW, I put together this spreadsheet, estimated it. I imagined they were working for me, and here's how much effort they'd have to put in,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And OSCU and Sherry reviewed it and agreed with everything for the most part. They thought for the dune and vegetation, the longer-term number should probably be the same as the short-term number, because it's going to be an ongoing effort. They'd have to come out and do new surveys and all that sort of thing.
Okay.
The only one that was sort of fuzzy was for the Argos monitoring, that equipment number. That was kind of just pulled out of the air,
Okay.
and
But they feel like that's realistic?
it's in the ballpark, yes.
Okay.
So they felt these numbers are all in the ballpark. If we wanted to use them as kind of a menu to say, yeah, let's pursue these two items in this
Okay.
first year, that these are valid.
Okay.
What I'd like to do is to consult with Fran offline, using this as the baseline, and we'll use it as a buffet menu and pull down from there.
Okay. So then will you bring this back to us, what you're thinking for next month, or what?
No, I'm just we'll go through it and see what we need, and we'll put it in the budget.
Okay.
Propose it in the budget and line item detail.
Okay.
I mean, if you guys think that these are good ideas, type of things, we'll see how it can be used on the ground truth.
Sure.
Some of these things, and ask the questions like, what type of power will we need at these locations? Is there additional cost above and beyond that?
Yeah.
Do we need modems to do real time? What kind of weatherproofing?
Yeah.
Above and beyond that, but use this as a skeleton to flesh out how we can pull those things into the budget.
Okay. Well, there's some sort of thing, for example, on the camera monitoring and stuff, and the weather station, I do think that would be a popular feature with people. Not related to beach monitoring, just related to visitors.
Right.
There's other aspects to that.
Tourism related.
Exactly, I think that would be like a really hot thing.
Yeah.
That's funny, because I had that down at the bottom of the list, thinking, let's get that report updated,
Okay.
let's do the dune the vegetation survey.
Yes,
As things that are
no, I'm just trying to point
more
out
from the
that
engineering, yes, I
it's
see
not
what
just
your
from us,
perspective is,
you know,
yes.
from a beach perspective, but that kind of, I think, does double duty, and then, you remember all the hoopla when Alan's camera went down.
Yes.
I think it's just popular, people like to see it. Yeah, I thought these were all beneficial, and I'd like to see how they react with,
How they enhance the work that ATM already does. And I
Right.
try to stress that every time I talk with Coach School.
Sure.
It seems like he has that message.
yeah, we don't want to duplicate effort here.
Right, right.
Okay, so how would you guys like to proceed with this item then? Budget items. We've got plantings and fertilization. We've talked previously about doing bubble budgeting for that, and I still have a call in to Steve and have not heard back. You talked about the mats, so we keep off the dune signs, a UNCW collaboration, additional monitoring, especially the west end and the Charlotte Inlet. Is there anything else that you guys are thinking we should be looking at? Sand sourcing is a question I had.
Sand source.
Sand sourcing for the next FEMA reimbursement for Florence and Michael. That we have lost more sand than we currently have identified offshore in this George Barrow area.
So it's obviously something we'll be talking about in our master plan. Is that something we need to worry about at this point, timeline-wise? You guys went through the whole Central Beach project and when FEMA made their declarations and that sort of thing. Is that 3 years out, or is that 3 months out that we'd have to worry about it?
I mean, to me, it's like we need to find the sand now.
You have to have the sand source before you can get the money.
Well, yeah, before you can get a permit, right? So we've got to do sand source,
It's part of the permit
Permitting.
Yeah, that's
application.
what I was saying. Yeah.
you know, there's this line of tasks.
Yeah.
And the first one is the sand sourcing, correct?
That's right. What we're talking about is for the 19 budget, the 19-20 budget, and we're going to be talking to the commissioners about what they want to see as far as how aggressive in the schedule to be with it. You know, we've got some feedback from thinking that we've got to
Yeah.
parse to them. I can forecast that we're going to be moving forward towards searching for sand before the end of this fiscal year, and another appropriation in order to do that's got to be made.
Okay. So then we don't need to address that, you've got that handled.
I don't think so.
Gotcha. That was my
I mean, I think I got a hand.
Okay, anything else? Would you guys like to make a motion that we recommend these items?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to recommend it.
So is there anything additional cost for,
And then discussion.
well, I'm not ready to second it. I'm asking a question.
Well, you have to second it so we can have discussion.
Any other costs involved with this master plan facilitation and the work that ATM's doing for us to, put this thing together? Is that listed here, or is that already?
We've got that covered in the
Okay,
existing
okay,
budget.
then I second the motion.
Okay. Now, is there any other discussion?
I already seconded it,
Oh, okay. Okay.
just so we get it in the record right.
Okay.
Then we had a discussion
Then we have a discussion.
now.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carried unanimously. Okay, Inlet and Beach Protection Board announcements. The CRC meeting February 27th and 28th is in Manteo. There's no agenda out there yet, but the inlet hazard area should be on there. Staff is attending that, right? I cannot attend it.
Was it Manny or
Mania.
It's Manny.
Is it in Manny?
The coldest, this is the way they do it. The coldest time of the year is the farthest north. Mania in February is a great place.
Oh, I'm sure.
Rooms are
Where
cheap.
is that located?
Mania,
Outer Banks.
Yeah.
almost to Virginia.
Yeah. I talked to the town manager over at Southern Shores, which is up above there, and he said, how's the weather? And I said, well, it's pretty nice. He said, it's cold up here.
Wind, brother.
Yeah, he said, it's cold up here.
So the staff will definitely be there, correct?
Yes.
And if anybody wanted to attend, that'd be great. But Inlet has
It's a
a very.
2-day meeting, February?
27th, 28th,
Yeah, it's, and they're, what
Size
they usually do is they usually start midday on the first day and go till midday on the next day into the afternoon. But the fact is that it's 6-7 hour drive. I mean, you can drive DC quicker than you can. So it's really it's a 3-day trip is what it amounts to, unless you want to get up real early in the morning and get home real early at night. And my days of doing that.
We can send the agenda out so you can see it, and it should have a packet. So you can see what's being discussed.
Because it's really the Coastal Resources Commission meeting, but there's also a preamble to that. It's the Coastal Resources Advisory Committee meeting. So that usually starts about 10 o'clock in the morning. And then depending on what type of things. But the inlet hazard area is most likely going to be on that agenda, and that's really a function of the science panel, which is a subset of the Coastal Resources Advisory Committee. So that it's 2 days of jam-packed fun is what I anticipate.
Okay, the dune repair workshop is March 9th at Surf City. There's no need to pre-register for that, correct, Christy?
I think when David sent that out and I forwarded it, it said they were looking for pre-registration numbers.
They probably just want to get a nose count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a cost or anything.
Right,
Make
it's
sure
free.
they got a big enough room.
So it is.
Where was that, Surf City?
Surf City.
Surf City, yeah.
Yeah, what we talked about is besides dune repair for after storms, we could also get a look at what happens when you don't do beach nourishment.
And if any of you guys can make that, I understand yesterday's news lead was that Surf City has been denied by FEMA. And that's, I mean, it's strictly a function of that they don't have an engineered beach. And so that you may be able to gather some information, and that would add to the importance of not only maintaining our engineered beach status, but expanding on our status of engineered beach for Holden Beach, more than just what we have so far.
So if anybody plans to attend, maybe we could let Christy know. Christy, I plan to be there. The speakers are Spencer Rogers from NCC Grant and Jason Dale from NC Department of Coastal Management. And as a bonus for going, everybody gets the free dune book. So, little party favor there. The Brunswick Shoreline Protection Consortium, March 27th was the next date that they set. Our March meeting for this board will be March 28th. NC Byways, April 29th and 30th at the Islander Hotel in Emerald Isle. That is really not aimed at us, correct?
It's local governments, that's what it is. It's staff and appointed elected officials.
Okay.
That's more of a legislative liaison type of thing.
So you guys would be there and maybe you take some commissioners or?
If they want to cut.
Okay.
That's where the lobbying is gonna happen?
No, that
Local lobbying?
I don't know if it's local lobbying or not. There's a lot of promises made in the hallways. Most of the time, NC Byways is the Daddy Rabbit organization, and they have very similar to the type of information that you went to in the fall conference, but it's not as robust an agenda because the focus is more on getting issues prepared to entertain for the upcoming legislative session because it's in April. Remember, this is the long session that's just kicked off. We've already got some draft bills introduced, and so there will be, that's where the focus will be. Or it's been my experience in what I've witnessed in the past. We always have a couple of three state senators and state legislators.
Is this where they talk about funding the new beach nourishment fund?
That's probably going to be on the, and I would envision that's one of the topics on the agenda. Would be in a position to suggest to Kathleen here in the very near future to get an update on the easement issues, the dredge spoil area management issues here locally. So they always have a forum for the feds, the federal agencies to interact along with the state agencies, but it's primarily has a legislative orientation to it.
Okay. And then the big NC Byways Conference is November 12th and 13th. I just threw that in there because that's on our website. At the Holiday Inn in Wrightsville Beach. So does anybody have any other announcements?
Not an announcement, but I think that we missed it when we talked about the budget, but I believe we talked about it before. But it is an event driven that the American Shore and Beach Preservation meeting is going to be in Myrtle Beach in the fall upcoming year. So I know we've got that captured somewhere, but if you guys want to pencil that in, that's an opportunity that we don't need to pass by for exposure.
Now, Christy, you're going to DC, right, for that conference?
Yes,
Okay, so then you can report back what you learned and,
yes.
okay. If there are no other announcements, shall we move on to our short report for the February meeting of BOC. Again, same process, I'll read the draft and you guys will make corrections on the flyer. The Inlet and Beach Protection Board met February 13th, and the following issues and topics were addressed. Status of the beach and inlets. Staff provided an overview of conditions and issues relative to the beach stranded inlets. Grand Way of ATM gave a status update on the storm damage and modeling work on the Lockwood Folly Inlet. With the federal declaration of Brunswick County as a disaster area due to Tropical Storm Michael, reimbursable sand losses in the engineered portion of the beach will total approximately, and I've got a bad name in there. We didn't really talk about that.
We didn't talk about cost.
So we need to edit that. The wider, deeper project is still pending. Let me read that again, and you guys edit me here. Staff provided an overview of conditions and issues relative to the beach and strand inlets. Grand Way of ATM gave a status update on the storm damage and modeling work on the Lockwood Folly Inlet. With the federal declaration of Brunswick County as a disaster area due to Tropical Storm Michael, reimbursable sand losses in the engineered portion of the beach will total approximately, I have down 750,000 cubic yards, and that's not correct, but it's kind of irrelevant because we didn't talk about it, right?
Right.
Can we just take out that line?
Yep.
I mean, you can say that we got the declaration from Michael. They've probably already heard that though, right? But it doesn't hurt to reinforce it. So now efforts will have to get underway as far as the next project, right?
I have plans going forward were discussed, which we did touch on, I guess, and the wider, deeper project is still pending.
Wasn't there a little more detail around the deepener and widener project? The next things that were happening around that?
I said that the Board of Commissioners were going to receive an update in their agenda packets that's going out today.
Okay. So if I add that in there, does that sound okay? If I take out reimbursable sand losses, take out that word? Then plans going forward were discussed. The wider, deeper project is still pending. The BSC will receive an update in their packet.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Is that good? Okay, possible collaboration with UNCW. Dr. Joni Osku-Backstrom and Dr. Sherry Shiplet discussed the work UNCW is doing and possible areas of collaboration.
With the town and ATM?
Okay. Comprehensive long-term plan. Work on the plan was kicked off. ATM will be working with us to help facilitate the report. We plan to complete the deliverable within 6 months.
Kathy was introduced. I don't know what the official acronym is for your planner role.
AICP, yeah.
Okay, I wrote that.
Schedule was provided.
So Kathy, with her credentials of ATM, you're with ATM, right? Was introduced and will serve as our facilitator and facilitate the effort. And a schedule was provided. Budget on
Schedule and kind of a high-level list of contents that the plan is going to have. Right?
Concepts.
Okay. Anything else on that one?
Well, then Fran kind of backed it up with some plan history, you know, that things have happened and been done over the course of the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Fran discussed the past
And major, what would you call them, major initiatives? They were major initiatives, really, that
Yeah,
occurred.
Yeah, elements of the previous, beach management activities.
Perfect.
Budget items for FY 1920, board members discuss projects and items they would like to see included in the upcoming budget. Items included additional mats, additional plantings, and regular dune fertilization schedule, replacement of keep-off dune signs, and additional monitoring for the west end and Shalot Inlet. A collaboration with UNCW and options were also discussed.
About the additional monitoring transects, did you say both inlets? Because it should be both inlets. I thought you just said Shalot Inlet.
I did say Shalot Inlet because that's what we had been discussing, and it seemed like we had a lot going on the east end that we were already tracking. You know, we've got the Oak transects and.
When I spoke to the extra transects, I was alluding to both inlets because of the activities possibly being affected by the deeper, wider project and any other activities that may take place in the future.
So that would be more of an increase in frequency, not necessarily increase in number of transects?
It's just a number of transects because we had at one time already established doing the transects on the east end, but now with this with the potential for other harvesting activities going on, we want to make sure that we perpetuate that. So when I was talking to it, I was talking about both.
Okay, so then on the west end there, you've got
Yeah,
the inlet and the area
The backside,
that's showing some erosion area.
right.
Okay, I'm gonna change load inlet to both inlets.
Right.
Okay. A collaboration with UNCW and options were also discussed. Did you want to add to that or do with that? A motion was made to recommend these items.
Mhm.
Okay. Meetings. Members of the board attended the Brunswick County Shoreline Protection Meeting January 30th and plan to attend the next meeting March 27th. The IBPV is following the CRC meeting in Manteo, February 27th, 28th, where the inlet hazard area changes will be discussed. I didn't commit anybody, I just said we're following it. Members are also attending a dune repair workshop March 9th in Surf City. The next IBP meeting is March 28th. Is there anything else? Would somebody like to make a motion that we, with these corrections, changes, we send this on?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That carried unanimously. Okay, we're down to the part of public comments.
You know, I always have something to say. I don't know, you know, but I love the idea of the additional collaboration. You know, you guys organizing this session and having the university involved in it and everything, and you know, all these parties, they all know one another and everything else. You know, I'm a data person, but I'm also the kind of person that, you know, I'm pushing to see results of the data. What does the data mean to us?
Yes.
I'm also very impressed with the fact that we continue to, there's 3 sections. We have the east end of the island, the central reach, and the west end of the island. And thank you for additional monitoring on both ends of the island. That's my public comment. Great job.
Okay.
Thank you, good.
Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add, or?
I'm fine.
Okay. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add? Okay, then motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.